Hey, Browns fans, it's Spencer German, Cole McDaniel here with you for the Browns Digest NFL Draft 2024 NFL Draft Preview Show. Just kind of a quick conversation with us and you as we get you ready for what should be an eventful 3 days in the NFL Draft. Granted, night one maybe a little more quiet for Cleveland because we're not anticipating a big trade up into the first round. We'll be able to talk first-round picks hopefully in 2025. But for this year, we're more so honing in on nights 2 and nights 3. Cole, real quick, man, just how excited are you for another NFL draft? I know this is like your Christmas in the spring, basically, because you love this stuff.
Yeah, basically is Christmas. You know, it's months and months and months of preparation and watching film and evaluating prospects. And then you finally feel like you're getting to Christmas Day. Only for the Cleveland Browns, the night one of the draft actually feels more like Christmas Eve because we just sit around and we wait because Christmas Day has been day 2 for the past couple years. It's that way again this year. Finally, that should change unless they trade their first round pick away next year. But, I'm excited certainly as like Christmas in the spring.
So I actually want to pick your brain on a few non-Browns related topics, but we'll get to that a little bit later in this conversation. I want to start because you mentioned obviously night one sort of going to be a night off for the Browns, not truly because they'll be working the phones and be ready, but they get to kind of prep and plan for Friday night 2, where they have the 54th overall pick and right now the 85th overall pick in the second and third round. Some of that, there could be some movement, but as you just kind of plan ahead for those nights, who are some of the players and well, let me ask you this first. What position do you think the Browns should prioritize first at 54, where you're going to get hopefully, or in an ideal world, the player that most likely can be like your most NFL ready player given the picks that they have?
Yeah, and I think it's probably a position group most people are not thinking about. And my mindset's more shifted towards that position group as time has gone on. And a lot of this actually comes to play, and we've been waiting for a hard timeline of when will Nick Chubb be back. And at this point, there's still no firm timeline. I mean, I've heard speculations of he might be back in September. He might be back in November, right? He's running on land, which is good news, but does that actually give us a full focus on when will he be back? Not really. And you have to remember that Nyheim Hines was brought in free agency, and he also had a knee injury and had a knee surgery.
Yeah.
So 2 of your really 4 running backs, because I think it's safe to assume that Pierre Strong's probably on the outside looking in right now. You have really Jerome Ford and Deonta Foreman are the only 2 guys that are guarantees to be healthy at the start of the year unless something changes during camp or anything. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But so you could be really thin September, maybe October, depending upon how things shape up. So my mindset has shifted towards running back, actually.
Wow.
I would love for them in a year where running back is considered a down year with this class. You're not going to see the first running backs probably come off the board until the second round, right? So you could actually hit the cream of the crop in the second round, get the best running backs in what's considered a down year, and maybe for a guy like Trey Benson, who would be my go-to of this class, I think he would be a great 1-2 punch with Jerome Ford, where he'd handle the power back workhorse duties on first and second down, and Ford could do more of the third down work. I think that would work for them. They'd probably have to trade up in order to get him, but I think why not take a shot in the second round? I'd like to see it. Don't know if they do it, but for me, it could be exactly what they need, not only this year, but for 2025.
I like where your head's at with that, thinking outside the box a little bit. There's been a lot of talk about wide receiver, defensive line, and I know running back's kind of been a whispered thing. And I do think, to your point, I think running back is a position fans should be ready to see this team take in some capacity this weekend. I don't know if it's going to be Trey Benson at 54, if they trade up to get him. I know in my last 2 mock drafts that I did, which you can find those, we've put up now, I think 6 of them total at si.com/NFL/Browns. And our mock draft 6.0 that I just released on Wednesday morning, I had Audric Estime from Notre Dame going to the Browns. I think like 125. I had him. They made a trade back and they got that pick from the Buccaneers. So like I think that at some point along the way here, they're going to find a running back or they're going to draft a running back. It's just a matter of when. I don't know if I have it as high as a priority as going at 54. I've kind of zoned in more on like that defensive line concept that a lot of people are tossing around with guys like Chris Jenkins Jr. there, maybe a Michael Hall from Ohio State there, two Big Ten guys that we're pretty familiar with. But I like where your head's at with that because I do think that it's a position they're prioritizing. And before you actually recorded this, we were talking just off the air about Nick Chubb and his future with the team. And I do think you're talking about a 30-year-old running back now with technically 3 knee surgeries because he had 2 on this latest injury. And that's kind of problematic. Like if you're trying to think about the future, I can see why that would be something you'd want them to prioritize.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a position that's addressed, like you said, no matter when it is. I even in my first mock draft, I had Rasheen Ali, the running back from Marshall, being selected in the 7th round by the Browns. A guy who's going to be a sleeper because of his injury issues, but he actually played his high school football at Shaker Heights, went off to Marshall, was extremely productive. Sure, he's had his injury issues, but somebody's going to get a steal in the draft when they take Rasheen Ali. So he's a guy who you could get maybe later in the draft who could be a sleeper. So regardless of whether they target it at 54, sometime in the 2nd round, or they do it in the 7th round, they need to take a running back in this draft at some point. It's a matter of, does the value make sense? Is it a guy that they like? And like I said, they really haven't hosted on top 30 visits many running backs. Trey Benson was really their guy at running back that they hosted, and he's my number 1 running back prospect. So that's why he's my focus there. But I do think that they're going to take a running back at some point, like you said.
So if it's not Trey Benson or a running back at 54, what are some of the other players, guys that especially have been linked to this team via top 30 visits or at the combine where they maybe met with them, that makes sense in that range? And I think that's the key thing here because there's been a lot of players mocked to the Browns at 54 who are going to fall. And again, everyone's big board is a little arbitrary. We don't know what the Browns' big board is going to look like. So maybe they have somebody like Trey Benson higher than, say, the Bills or somebody, right? But in that range, what other players or names that you've maybe seen make sense for them at 54?
Yeah, behind Benson, my number 2 guy at that spot is Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle of Ohio State. I think bringing in Hall, who, again, another local guy, played his high school football in Borough, right? They could bring him right back to Northeast Ohio. And Hall is a guy who is really good at getting after the quarterback from the defensive tackle spot. He's shifty, he's elusive, he's quick. He's not going to be your run stuffer. I would say he compares more with his size at about 290 pounds, plus that speed to rush the passer, especially on 3rd down, much like Maurice Hurst. Hurst is a guy who got brought back on a 1-year contract. So you look at 2025, if they decide not to bring back Hurst again, then Michael Hall Jr. is a direct replacement for Hurst. I really like Hall, and obviously Ohio State players have done well for the Browns in recent times. The only reason why I lean Benson and running back more than Hall is because Hall's probably only going to give you value on maybe 30% of the reps out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's going to be the pass rush downs. Whereas I was thinking running back, right? That's a guy who could be your starting running back for years to come. So Hall would be great, but will he be utilized as much? Probably not.
Yeah, I think that's a good name that a lot of people are familiar with, obviously locally, but also just because of his play at Ohio State. And part of the reason, you bring up how many snaps he played versus Benson. I think that's a really good way to look at it, just in terms of like impact that the player is going to make. But part of the reason why I think Dave line makes sense for them potentially at 54, whether it's Michael Hall, whether it's another name I threw out was Chris Jenkins Jr. Or some others. Part of the reason why I like that position for them in that range is because we know in Jim Schwartz's defense, he rotates a lot of guys along that defensive line. And so that player is going to play. They don't necessarily have to have an immediate impact where they're like there's a lot on their shoulders to be this starter who's doing everything. They can kind of learn from guys like Dalvin Tomlinson and Maurice Hurst and Shelby Harris, and then take the reins as they get a little bit more older and develop. So I kind of like that idea too, and that's why I like a guy like Michael Hall there as well. I do want to ask you specific to that pick, because another hot debate has been about whether or not they should use it on a wide receiver, but we know that Cleveland went out and traded for Jerry Jeudy. How high of a priority do you think wide receiver is, given what they did this offseason with the Jerry Jeudy trade? We know Andrew Berry has literally drafted a wide receiver in every single draft since he's been GM for the Browns. So it's another position like running back I'm anticipating they take at some point. But do you think it's that high of a priority right now where it is in play for them at 54?
Yeah, I'm probably the rarity here where it sounds crazy, but I have a theory of trying to outsmart the rest of the league that I don't necessarily know if the Browns are going to follow, right? But I went back and I took a look at the stats, and I think there's been a lot of good receivers in the last three classes. But in the last three classes, in the top 100 picks, it's been an average of 15 wide receivers selected.
Wow.
Okay? It was 14, 15, and 16. This year, I'm projecting, because of how good this receiver class is, somewhere between 17 and 20 receivers selected in that top 100 picks. So let's say it's hypothetically on the high end, right? If 20 receivers are selected in the top 100 picks, that means that's 5 more than we're used to in recent times. So 5 picks every pick really goes a long way, right? Because with every selection, that means another talented player slides down the board. So my theory on this is that the more that other teams choose wide receivers, that means the better prospects and players at other position groups slide down that board. So that gives you shots at 5 guys who shouldn't probably be there by the time you're picking that are actually going to be there this year. So my crazy theory is this: you already brought in Jeudy, right? I actually wrote a piece recently of how I think David Bell was on the trajectory, like the rising trajectory at the end of last year, and he needs an opportunity to get more targets himself because he's been underutilized just because of how Deshaun Watson's had the suspension, the injuries. We haven't seen the Browns be able to spread the ball around the field like they've wanted to. They had to go with 2022 Brissett handing the ball off, play action. It was 2 wide receivers out there most of the time. So, and then last year, the carousel, until Joe Flacco came in, they really weren't airing it out. So I don't think the full wide receiver room's even been utilized enough. I'd like to see it be utilized with what they have. And then when they have a first rounder next year, then they can target the top of that class, Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, some of those receivers. So me personally, I would actually avoid receiver in the best receiver class in history, because I think other teams.
Don't we say that every year, though? Isn't every year like the best receiver class in history? Like, I feel like that, and I get it. Like this year, there's like in a true like it is not devoid of talent. I mean, you have Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors at the top of it. You got some other guys worked in that are going to be really, really good or should be really good. Roma Dunze, so I get it, but it's just funny because every year I feel like we're like, oh, this wide receiver class, this is the one. This is the best one ever.
It's gotten better all the time. Obviously, we will have to look back at this in future years and be like, hey, well, how did this class actually shape up? But as prospects, strictly, this wide receiver group is ridiculously good. I felt like 1 through 19, everybody had a case to be in the top 10 of the prospect rankings, at least for me, at that wide receiver spot. So it's a crazy good class.
Yeah.
But I think because it's so good and there's so many other teams that need wide receivers, that the Browns can take advantage of other position groups not getting touched. And that's my theory, at least for this year.
Yeah, and I do think because it is so deep, there's a chance they can get one on day 3 even and still find some value there if they really want to. Yeah. That's kind of why I've gone away from thinking wide receivers a higher priority for them. If it is, though, just real quick, what are some of the names that would make sense in that range? And if you want to go and expound it to even like the third round, the 85, because I actually think, like, based on what I've seen from where I know Malachi Corley's been a name on their list. He visited Berea. 54 seems like it might be sort of still high for where he's kind of being mocked a lot of the time. So I found it kind of interesting that he is at the top of their list where maybe if they traded back, it would make more sense. But where do you kind of see him falling, and what are some of the other names that could make sense?
Yeah, of the receivers that visited Berea, specifically like Ladd McConkey visited. Obviously, I know Troy Franklin
yeah.
supposedly didn't visit on a top 30 visit, but he did meet with the team at the combine for sure. Those are a couple of the names you're seeing being thrown out a lot at wide receiver. Malachi Corley, for me, is the best of those three, not only just in my prospect rankings. I value him higher than the other two. I think he'd be better fit for Cleveland. He's kind of got this Deebo Samuel-esque ability to him because he's a former running back. So he offers value on jet sweeps, just out of the slot when he catches that football. I mean, he runs like a running back. So he's got the speed, he's got the power. He offers a different dynamic than most wide receivers do in the NFL, and it could be super valuable. So Corley, for me, is the best of those wide receiver prospects that we're seeing rumored to the Browns. My only concern is I hope he's available at that time, because even though I think that they should maybe avoid wide receiver, I'd be thrilled if they take Corley because I'm really high on him. But because of how I think this wide receiver class is, I wouldn't be surprised if Franklin's gone, McConkey's gone, and Corley's gone by the time it gets to 54. Because I actually think Corley is more highly valued than a lot of people are giving him credit for. I just think a lot of teams are probably looking at that type of Deebo Samuel comp, and I wouldn't be shocked if he goes in the early second round.
I like that. Some good analysis there on Corley, and that's a name I know fans are potentially excited about. Staying with the wide receivers for a second, why are we doing this with Marvin Harrison Jr.? There was this story today, and I know why. I know that every year this happens, the days before the draft, these rumors are floated out there to sort of be try to scare people away from drafting him so that a guy falls. But to actually, for somebody to put the quote on the record that Marvin Harrison Jr.'s tape doesn't wow you is just idiotic. That person should just lose their job anyway. But my bigger question is, when this stuff does get floated out there, are GMs and scouts of other teams actually buying this stuff? Because if you do your homework, you should know that that's not true, right? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I think any GM that actually sees that stuff, they're probably laughing at it, honestly.
They have to be.
Here's the obvious thing. Remember, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s dad, Marvin Harrison Sr., is a Hall of Famer. He's a great wide receiver.
Yes.
You know the evaluation about his son? His son is bigger than his dad. He's faster. He's stronger, right? All the intangibles are better than his dad, who is an incredible top-tier wide receiver in this league and a Hall of Famer. He's got it in his bloodline, right?
Sure, pass on that. Go ahead. I dare you.
Everything with his trajectory points you to the direction of he could be, if not one of the best receivers in the league immediately. He has the guy who, if he has the potential to be, if he can land in the right spot, right, and have a good, long, sustained career, he can be one of those guys that people are looking back 20 years, 30, 40 years from now saying, wow, that guy was incredible. Loved watching him play, and we're talking about him being a legend, probably a Hall of Famer himself. Obviously, it's a lot to put on the kid because he isn't made in the league yet, but he's a for sure thing, right? It would be foolish for the Arizona Cardinals to trade out of 4 and not take him. They need a wide receiver in a thin wide receiver room. They sent Rondale Moore off to the Atlanta Falcons to bring Desmond Ridder in as the backup quarterback for Kyler Murray. So they got rid of another piece. I mean, it's a given that he should be the guy in Arizona there at number 4, as long as he's still sitting in that spot and somebody didn't trade ahead. But GMs are just laughing at that.
I hope you're right, because that's it's silly season for a reason. I have sort of 2 final things here. Yeah. The last one's a fun one, and that's kind of related back to the Browns. But with all the talk about the quarterback position, and we know that's going to be the hot topic going into night 1 here later tonight, when many of you are watching this and consuming this. How do you what do your rankings look like for these quarterbacks? And I want to know if JJ McCarthy is worth the high end pick that people are projecting he's going to get. Because for me, I'm just going to tell you now, JJ McCarthy feels like a guy that was hidden in the offense that he played in. Like, if he was as good as everybody thinks he is, why did they? And I understand, like, well, they had a really good run game and blah, blah, blah. But, like, okay, but Ohio State's had really good running backs too, and they weren't hiding C.J. Stroud behind, TreVeyon Henderson for 2 years. Like, that wasn't a thing that was happening.
Right. I mean, I think J.J. McCarthy, I'll touch on that first. I mean, the thing with J.J. McCarthy is I think people are holding on to the hope that this is a Tom Brady type of situation, right? They're seeing a Michigan quarterback.
Oh.
They're thinking, oh, man, can we get a Michigan quarterback? And specifically the talks about potentially the Patriots wanting him at 3. Drake May's probably sitting in their lap there at 3. The Patriots should just take Drake May. I would say that he has a much higher floor than J.J. McCarthy, which I think is important because then at least at minimum, even if he's not that great, he could be an okay starting quarterback where McCarthy could potentially be a bust. A lot of people have that concern. So he was shielded by the run game at Michigan. Sure, he has some athleticism, but I don't fully trust his ability to, in a game where he is to throw the ball 30 times, 40 times a game. Can he do it? I don't know. We've never seen it, right?
Yeah.
So for me, if we were thinking logically about J.J. McCarthy, he doesn't get selected until the 2nd or 3rd round. But because he's going to get overvalued and there's the hope that he turns into something good and he's won everywhere he's gone, teams are hoping it pans out. And that's something that's going to cost somebody their job, likely, would be my guess.
So does he end up with Minnesota, you think?
That's
or Denver. I feel like those are the two big players for him, Denver or Minnesota.
My crazy opinion, I actually think it still sounds crazy. I'm sticking to it. I know that there's the talks of Minnesota trading up to 5 with the Chargers and taking J.J. McCarthy. I really think that the Chargers, because they need a wide receiver so bad, I actually think they'll stick at 5 and take Malik Neighbors, but just because they're empty in that wide receiver room, they'd be foolish not to take a guy like Neighbors when we talked about how good Marvin Harrison Jr. is, but Neighbors is ridiculously good himself. They have to take the shot on him, honestly. If they don't do it, they might be regretting it. So if McCarthy's sitting there at 6, I think the Giants are dumb enough to try to replace Daniel Jones, McCarthy, who is my quarterback for J.J. McCarthy. I think they're identical players.
Cole, you're a madman. I love it. You have all these like off the cuff ideas of like how this is going to play out, and I love it so much. That's interesting. My take that I had on another podcast I do is that if Jim Harbaugh has spent all this time talking up J.J. McCarthy, well, Jim, put your money where your mouth is then and draft the quarterback that you think is so damn good. Like, if you think he's that good, wouldn't you pick him at 5 if he's so good? Huh? Just saying. I'm just saying. I know you got Justin Herbert, but you can always trade him. It's never going to happen because the cap hit's too big if they did. But I'm just saying that was my take, that he should just take him.
Just for entertainment value, right? J.J. McCarthy goes to the Chargers and Justin Herbert gets shipped off to the Minnesota Vikings.
That'd be fun.
It'd be entertaining, that's for sure.
It'd be fun. That's my dream. Well, speaking of your dream, we'll get out of here with this. You and I both share in this tradition. I love to watch the movie Draft Day, either like the night before the draft or the day of the draft leading up to it if I have time. Who is your Vonte Mack no matter what? Is it Trey Benson? Did you already give it away? But who is your Vonte Mack no matter what for the Browns at 54?
For me, it's hard for the Browns in the 2nd round with a roster that's as complete as what they have right now. It's hard to be in a position where we have to take this guy no matter what because the roster's in a great spot. I don't think you can do much wrong with that pick, to be honest. As long as you get somebody who can offer you good value, can develop in 2024 and has a potential to start in 2025 when we're anticipating that there might be some roster reconstruction next year. So as long as they're doing their due diligence to get ahead of that, I don't think you can do much wrong. Benson's the guy at the top of my list based off of their needs and needing a good running back, probably not only for the start of this year, but for next year and beyond for sure. So he would be my Vonte Mack no matter what, but it's hard to put that definitive of a label on it.
It is hard when you don't have a 1st-round pick for sure. So I won't hold your feet to the fire too hard. I think for me, it's another guy we talked about. I think Michael Hall, if he's there, I think it makes a ton of sense for them to take him. And just like the fit with it being an Ohio guy, a Northeast Ohio guy, that comes into play for me, I think, and I think that goes over well with the fans. Obviously, we love our Clevelanders in Cleveland, so I think that's probably the one for me. But you're right, that's not as fun as an exercise. I'm realizing suddenly when you don't have a first round pick, where it's like you're getting this generational talent. When it's a guy that is going to need some time to develop, it's kind of like it's this guy, but it's okay if they don't take him. So we'll have to play again next year when they have a first round pick again.
We will. And so since I couldn't get you as bold of a take there, I will at least give you a bold take here. We talked about quarterbacks briefly. Here's one for you. I think because Michael Penix was actually my number 2 quarterback prospect behind Caleb Williams this year. I think he's such an accurate quarterback. The injuries are getting overplayed at this point. I think his ability as a passer and how accurate he is and how he can sit back there and just throw the ball 40 times a game and just pick apart a defense. If he lands in the right spot in the NFL, I think he's going to be the most successful quarterback of this group. So I'd be interested to see him land in Minnesota with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson. I think that would be great for him. Maybe if the Raiders stay put, he goes to Las Vegas. But I actually think of this class, Michael Penix Jr. is going to be the most successful of all of these quarterbacks.
Wow, there's a take for you. I like that. Yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams is going to the Bears, so he's doomed. We already know that.
Yes.
No, Cole, this was great, man. Good conversation, and hopefully this provides our loyal fan base, both of Browns Digest, but also just the Browns in general, with some good insight into where the Browns' heads could be at coming up in day 2 of the draft. But we had a chance to talk about some of the other stuff that could play out night 1. I can tell you guys we have a ton of stuff planned for this entire weekend. So, instant reaction and posts going up when picks are made, we'll have for you. And you can find all that again on the site si.com/NFL/Browns. We obviously have all the mock drafts up right now that we've done, 6 of them leading up to the start of the draft on Thursday. So you can check those out if you want to, the wee hours before everything gets rolling. If you want to kind of see where we've kind of projected and who we've kind of projected to Cleveland in certain spots. And we'll have more content like this at the Browns Digest YouTube channel because each night we'll sort of sit down and have a conversation. I know Cole and I are going to reconnect after night 1 and just kind of give you some big picture. All right, how'd the board kind of fall? Who do we think's in play going into night 2? And we'll do the same thing on Friday night going into day 3 and kind of recap who they picked. So a ton of content for you to follow along with. Again, make sure you are subscribed and following along with the Browns Digest YouTube channel. You're going to find a ton of video stuff over there, like I said, this weekend with Cole and I, hopefully Anthony getting involved and potentially even Brendan. But in the other big spot you want to know, again, is just si.com/NFL/Browns. We'll have anything that happens with the Browns centered on the draft, prospects that they could be looking at in day 2 after day 1 ends. All that is going to be going up as soon as possible each and every single night. So be sure to keep keep following along and just paying attention to all that stuff. So guys, we appreciate you jumping on in with us. Keep it locked. We have a lot more where this came from, and we're looking forward to what should be an eventful weekend out in Berea and for your Cleveland Browns.